Welcome to Shockaholic, where we discuss the shocking sides of cinema. Today I am proud to present to you a little bit of coverage for the Salem Horror Fest 2020. If you're not too familiar with it, the Salem Horror Fest is based in Salem, Massachusetts, and as you can imagine, Salem, given its history, has a very strong connection with horror. Not only does it have a strong connection with horror, it has a great connection with the political landscape of horror. So that's what the Salem Horror Fest has been dedicated to and for, is presenting an opportunity for filmmakers who would otherwise not have a voice, or who have a voice that needs to be heard, an opportunity to be presented to an audience such as myself and yourself. They are currently taking pre-order tickets for the event, and the event will be running between October 2nd and October 10th, so that's 2 weekends worth of wonderful horror films for everybody to check out. And the most impressive thing about the entire festival this year is that it is going to be digital, and it's going to be available pretty much worldwide. There's only one film that they have reported on that is geo-locked to the United States. So for the rest of them, they have allowed them to open them up and allow anybody from around the world to get a ticket. So please look in the description below for information about Salem Horror Fest, and try to get yourself either a weekend ticket for the weekend that interests you the most, or try to get a ticket that will get you the entire event and some more goodies throughout the entire year. So please check out the description for that information. And thank you so much to the Salem Horror Fest for allowing me the opportunity to report on some of the films that they will be discussing. At the very least, for the film that we're going to be discussing today, I am going to talk about a film called Black Lake. This is from director KXI, XI representing the Roman numeral for 11. And it's an interesting film. It takes K's background and heritage from Pakistan and being British, and it puts it into one package. So what is this film and what is it about? Well, I've already kind of talked about what it's about, really. It's about heritage, so to speak. It's really honing in on what it means to have a background from another land, how to appreciate that background a little bit more, but also the part of that background where we have a tendency to kind of gloss over the darker sides in favor of just giving focus to the things that are nice and the things that we feel should be preserved. But what's also important is that, yes, you should preserve the nice things, but in doing so, you should also be aware of how did we get here, what sort of things are not nice about our cultures, and what can we change? What are things that people need to know about? And I think Kay did a pretty damn good job showing this for the audience. Now, I do want to already jump out the gate here saying about this film, this is not going to be a film for everybody. It's a very experimental take on a horror film. There are a lot of techniques used here that you see very commonly in short films, so films that have a duration of around half an hour, 45 minutes or so. And this is a full 1.5 hour film, and for some people that may grate on the nerves just a little bit. If you don't like montages, I don't know if you're gonna like this movie. I didn't really mind it so much, but I will say there are quite a few montage sequences here. But honestly, I think that that really works in the film's favor. I really enjoyed the fact that this movie decided to be bold and take a completely different stance. There is a narrative, but the narrative is told very sporadically and primarily through the visuals. So this is a very visually heavy film. And I think that Kay did a great job showing you different images to convey different emotions, and just blew it out of the water in how these images look. I mean, this movie is beautiful. Really, if you're gonna go check this movie out, even if you're kind of like, about what I've said about the montages, just check it out for the visuals alone, and you're gonna get a pretty interesting story, not to mention a little bit about Pakistani heritage that you may not have been aware of. So it's a win-win in all sides, in my opinion. I think it's a pretty fruitful film to check out. But what are we dealing with here? I talked about the visuals. The visuals are breathtaking. You get to see a lot of the Pakistani countryside. That's where our main character Arya is. She's an artist who's gone off into Pakistan to try to get away from it all, and is in a holiday house, and you just see a lot of the countryside. And a lot of this film is shot in Pakistan, some of it shot in Scotland, some of it shot in England, and each area has a completely different visual language to it. There are a lot of dreamlike sequences as well that are told through really strange close-ups and a lot of strange different takes on how to show the countryside or animals, or just a lot of conveying is being done in this film. And for some that may be a little slow, maybe plod on just a little bit, and for others you're really gonna get a kick out of it, you know? But hey, for your blood fiends out there and horror hounds and gore hounds, there's plenty of that as well. This movie really goes to some dark places emotionally, but also visually. There's plenty of blood for you to be checking out, so don't be fooled by this. Although this movie has a very strong political statement to it and has a very strong focus on experimentation with filmmaking, it does not skimp out on the horror at all. One thing that I actually found quite impressive, I did a little bit of research and I found that K was behind the scenes in just about every aspect of the film that you can think of. Producer, director, camera work, a little bit, I think K did the editing as well, and starred. Aria is played by K herself, and it's an interesting take to do that. In some of the interviews that I've seen with her, you know, she eventually came to the conclusion that this was her story to tell, and I have to agree that the way that the film was made would not have been possible if you had used a different actress for this role. So the fact that Kay did everything, both in front and behind the camera, deeply impressive, and it shows. Everything feels cohesive because of it. Are there shortcomings to the film? I would say so, yes. I feel they're a little bit nitpicky, but I think that some of the performances could have used a little bit of polish here and there, but considering that we have one person who is kind of doing it all and some of these aspects are kind of thrust upon them, I'm pretty impressed with what I saw. Maybe there were moments where there are certain lines that could have been delivered in a way that would have, I don't know, they would have worked a little bit better for me, but hey, you know. Well, that's fine. It's fine, especially considering the amount of real good directing and cinematography and editing that we see on display. Just from one person. That's really impressive. All the stuff behind the camera is tip-top. Absolutely loved it. I'd say the failings that I noticed were mainly in the script, mainly with the dialogue. Sometimes it felt a little too kind of punched in just to kind of let you know what was going on, or to give you a bit of the backstory, because you see, what we're dealing with here is a melding of Pakistani folklore and a bit of current Pakistani, well, political issues, actually. I think that's the best way to put it. So, as I've already touched on a little bit, the story revolves around Aria, who's an artist who's gone into the Pakistani, not really the wilderness so much as like the nice open-air desert areas in a holiday house, to kind of vibe and just detox from all the city life, get a little in touch with nature, and maybe get some inspiration for her art. It takes a little while before we discover what Aria's sort of art form is. Is it poetry? Is it filmmaking? What is it? And I'm still not too sure if there is just one. I think Aria is presented more of a kind of artist in the round, if you will, but painting seems to be the one that's focused on the most as the film progresses. And while she's there, she discovers a red scarf in the mail that's delivered to her by her aunt. And her aunt is a bit more of a second generation Pakistani living in England, whereas Aria is born and bred third generation, or possibly even later. So the film starts really early on with the two of them having conversations about Pakistani heritage, and she even says to her aunt, like, oh, you're so Pakistani for giving me this scarf, because it's handmade and it's traditional, and you got it from your small town where you were from, and ah ha ha. You know, she kind of like laughs it off as if it's cute. And her aunt says, well, you should respect that stuff a little bit more. And she learns, well, throughout the course of the film, that maybe she should have respected it a bit more. But she also learns that what comes with respecting one's heritage is also accepting the fact that one's heritage isn't always that nice. Or at the very least, there are aspects to it that we have a tendency to blind ourselves to all the time, and we really shouldn't. We should really make sure that we give a focus to these things. The folkloric element of this film is focusing on an entity called the Churiel. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kay, but that's what I got, Churiel. And it is a ghostly woman whose feet are turned backwards and whose hair goes down her face. And she is the rageful representation of women who have been wronged in most, well, to put it in very blunt terms, I'd say a trigger warning here, but women who have been raped and murdered. And they are the vengeful spirits that are created from the memory of these women. And this is where the film takes its rather dark and gut-punching turn, which I found impressive. I found it deeply enthralling to watch. My girlfriend was actually sitting and reading a book with her headphones on. She wasn't paying attention and just suddenly she just kind of had a moment of looking up because she saw the flashes on the screen, and as we were getting into the moments with the Cheerio and getting into the moments where they're showing what it means and what it entails, she was just enthralled without sound. She was just taken away by the images, which is the strongest part of this film. Make no mistake about it. KXI knows her way around a camera. There are beautiful close-ups, there are beautiful expansive establishing shots as well, a lot of dreamlike color palettes used to make sure things feel a little off at all times. But most impressively, I found, and this is what I meant by the fact that the director was the person also playing the role, was the fact that she shows Arya in a very intimate way throughout the film. There's a lot of focus on the body, close-ups of the neck, close-ups of her midriff, of her knees. She bathes. And it's never sexual, it's never erotic, it's factual. So it's an intimate space. It's very much a gaze onto a female body, but it doesn't necessarily have this male gaze or female gaze that is associated to it. It is a sort of mid-space, an androgyny, if you will. Arya has a rather androgynous appearance and energy to her as well, which is beautiful. Arya is just pure, beautiful artistry on display, and I think that Kay did a phenomenal job trying to make sure that we get a good, intimate look into her comfort with her body, without it being a factor that she is an overly sexualized being because of this. So kudos, hats off, any other cliche or stereotypical phrase that you want to give to that, but for real, I really was impressed with that and rather appreciative of it. I think it was a nice touch. For some, it may actually create a weird discomfort just to be so up in somebody's personal space like that, but there is a comfort to it just because of how comfortable Arya is with her body and how comfortable the camera is being there without fetishizing anything. So fantastic there. Well, I don't want to go into the details of what actually happens, of course, not in this section of the review in any case. I just want to make sure that those of you who are going to ship off now to wait until you see Black Lake at the festival, hopefully please go check out the festival and check out Black Lake. I can highly recommend that you do so. As I've said time and time again on this channel and on Twitter, you should really be supporting independent filmmakers and up-and-coming stars. And this is a great example of what you'd be supporting. Somebody who is cutting their teeth and with limited budget and limited time managed to pump out something that is impactful, beautiful, and deeply unsettling at the same time. So if what you are into is a little bit of an artistic flair, if you want to have a bit of an art house film in your horror film, check this one out. Please do, and you're gonna have a fun time, I think. But that's it for the spoiler-free section. There's plenty to say in the spoiler section, so for the rest of you who are willing to hear the spoilers despite not seeing it, or if you have seen it, come with me. We are about to stay up late. It's time for After Hours. Welcome to After Hours. So we're going to talk a little bit about the spoilers for Black Lake. Let's start off with some of the things that I found a little confusing, I suppose. Things that are, I guess you can say the cons, the minus points, whatever you want to call them. The parts that I think are the more critical aspects of the film, at least from my perspective. And there's a difficult narrative to the film. It's really hard to follow what's going on because the film is told in a series of dream sequences. But although the film is very beautiful, I didn't feel that there was a very strong distinction between when something was a dream and when it wasn't. And it is clear about an hour or so into the movie that that was intentional, which is fine. So I can't really fault the film for doing that, or for Kay or anybody for making that decision. But it did throw me off to the degree that most of the time when I was watching something, instead of really taking in what was being shown or the emotion that was probably trying to be put on display, I was just making notes and trying to piece together, like, what? How could that even happen? And you figure out maybe it's a dream sequence, and I had the thought multiple times, like, okay, I think it's a dream sequence now. I'm not too sure. And it was confirmed to me later, when we got to certain parts of the film that they made it clear she's waking up. I was like, okay, this is a dream. The reason this bothered me just a little bit was the duration of it. I don't know if I misread parts of the film, but it felt to me that there's like a good 45-minute section or so that is a dream sequence. And it's as if she's gone to sleep, she wakes up, and then after she wakes up, everything's a dream for a long time, because there's a moment when she wakes up and she's wearing a shirt that's from earlier in the film, in a position where she was earlier in the film. We also see that she's already starting to turn into this Churiel creature, which I'll get to in just a moment, what that means and how that was done. But by doing so, she takes on a lot of the physical manifestations of the brutality of the horrible attacks that these women have gone under. And so her knuckles are ripped up, and she's bleeding from the mouth, and she's bleeding from everywhere. And she wakes up and she's very clean, pristine, no skin broken, nothing. And then it leads to her really turning into the creature. So it's kind of like a fake out within a fake out, but on like a long-term fake out. And it just didn't really click with me. I didn't understand where we were at that point, because we see this long build up to her getting consumed and possessed by this entity and taking over the emotion and becoming this entity, for it to kind of pull back and go, nope, it was all a dream. She was just having all of these emotions overnight. And then she turns into it anyway, and it's very much the same sort of thing that happens in this long dream sequence anyway. So I didn't really understand what the point of that was, unless we are trying to convey here, unless what Kay is trying to convey is something about how when we have a dream that can really empower us to take action, and sometimes that action really fits the same emotion that we had in our dreams. That's what I got from it, but it did take me a little bit of piecing together and just puzzling for myself, a bit of mental Olympics to put that together. So I don't know if Kay had intentionally decided to make this a more confusing segment of the film or not, so I'm just going to say how I felt. I felt it was a little confusing there. I went through those emotions. Is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I can't really say. It just happened, you know. I was pretty satisfied with it by the end of it, but I did think, oh, that was a very interesting decision that they made there. So that's one thing that was a little, I've already mentioned the acting in some places. The whole description of the Churiel over the phone didn't quite do it for me. I felt that anytime there was dialogue, that the emotions that were being conveyed were a little less powerful than they were when there was no dialogue. So I felt that all of the actresses in the film did a much better job with nonverbal communication, with expression. Expression was very strong in the film, but verbal communication wasn't the strongest here. And I think that's okay, especially in the terms of Arya, considering that Kay was the actress for Arya, and Kay had no intention of being Arya to begin with, and it just kind of fell in her lap after a while. Kudos to her for doing so. It's a very bold and just difficult role to play, and I think that for the most part she did a really good job. But I do have to bring those things up if I'm going to be critical. That said, apart from some confusion here and there in terms of pace, and I mean, yes, there's a lot of montages, so if you don't like montages, I've already said, you're not really going to like it very much. I didn't mind. I actually could see cool use of music here and there. Some of the music I felt was a little off. Some of it went to real upbeat territory when I didn't really know what was going on at that particular moment. But for the most part, it worked. The soundtrack design for the film, epic, really good, fantastic soundtrack. It's even available on vinyl. I'm not too sure if their vinyls are still available anymore, but you can go to Bandcamp and check out the soundtrack. Great stuff, check it out. Really, really cool synth drone stuff. So when everything got a little darker, or anytime that you needed the incidental music, so no, you know, songs, when we're using soundtrack here, it's just kind of like vroom kind of sound, whoom, these sorts of things. Really enjoyed that stuff. Love it in movies. And I thought it was a really cool choice to put it here. Normally you're gonna see it in a science fiction film, but this time we're doing it in more kind of like a folksy horror tale. And that was really cool. Kept it a bit contemporary, which was necessary considering the story that was being told. I cannot say enough about the visuals of the film. Just seeing the landscape just blew me away every single time. When we see the lake, the Black Lake, as it is mentioned, that's just a gorgeous whole area of water, and she's filmed it in such a way where the water does look like it's rather black. But you see a lot of close-ups from the faucet on the tub. You're seeing all kinds of different icons and imagery within the household, shots of her car. You're going to get flashbacks within the dream sequences, of course, of the spirit that is possessing her. And you get some really gnarly stuff of all the transformation stuff. So let's talk about that a little bit. So the transformations. What I mean by the transformation is that the way the story goes is that from getting the red scarf, the scarf has been possessed. So this is a real narrative thing about that I didn't want to talk about in the spoiler section, but she gets the scarf and she starts to have some strange dreams. She starts to see like a little girl. She starts to see a hammer bludgeoning something. The whole opening sequence of the film also gives you a bit of a teaser for this anyway, because the opening is just this red, unclear image with a woman who's breathing and sobbing, and you hear that thwack, thwack, and she's crying, and the music's swelling, and it just goes black like, and it shows you the name. And then you cut to this really upbeat music and this girl driving in her car and going to the holiday house. So it's a nice juxtaposition there. The transformations though, oh my goodness. When you get as far as the transformation, once they've discovered, okay, we're dealing with a Cheerio because she's seen the woman in her dreams with her feet backwards. She's seen her wearing the red scarf and a black scarf. She knows what she's dealing with. She knows from her aunt, who is more versed in Pakistani lore, and she knows this stuff as well, but she needs to come to terms with it and understand it so that she can really feel the impact of what's taking place here, which is where we get into the point of the film, actually. So as mentioned in my spoiler-free section, you have Arya talking to her aunt over the phone, kind of laughing about, oh, you're so Pakistani. And that narrative of you should respect your heritage more, that becomes the start of the film. So we already know something dark is going to happen with the scarf. We have a feeling that she's going to be haunted. In fact, there's even a moment at the beginning of the film that she's walking to the house and just kind of getting used to it, you know, touching the things, trying to figure out what kind of space she's in. And then as she's going to a particular room, the door just clacks open. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in an old house, but sometimes you have an old wooden house. I'm in one right now. The doors aren't really aligned properly all the time. The wood has a tendency to move around, so when you walk on it and creak, maybe it'll just kind of clack the door open. And I think that's what happens because it doesn't really come back in the film, but it just gives you a taste of, oh, some ghostly stuff is going to happen. And it doesn't really do that. It doesn't do it in the way that you're expecting it to. She doesn't see creepy girls with their hair on down her face the entire time. What she sees instead are horrible visions of this type of woman, but usually just sitting with the scarf draped over her with at a tree, and just, she gets more of an emotion. And we see this through the visuals that are being shown by Kay. We see so much imagery that gives you a particular feeling and a particular vibe. And I really love that. I love that the emotion that the character is feeling is given to us through the visuals and the soundtrack of the film. Very well done there. She slowly but surely starts to take on the pain and anguish of the person who used to own the scarf. So she does a bit of research. This is where it gets a little confusing too, because at one hand she has a dream that her aunt called her saying that she couldn't get blood off of her hands, and that Arya needed to get rid of the scarf because she knows it's a Cheerio. She knows that that belonged to a girl who was raped in their village. It had to have because she went missing during the time, and so you got to get rid of it. It's linked to somebody who's dead. And the next morning she wakes up, she does some research. Sure enough, she looks up that village. Around that time, a girl did go missing who was seen wearing a scarf that looked very similar. She calls her aunt, and her aunt's like, no, I didn't find it. I don't know what you're talking about. I bought it at a marketplace at my hometown. I didn't call you last night. And she's like, what? So she finds the information anyway in the real world, despite the dream telling her the information anyway. So it's confusing like that. And that's where the confusion came in with the dream sequence I told you about earlier, with the 45-minute block of her slowly succumbing to the transformations and waking up just battered and bruised and just cut up from her taking on the physical manifestation of what men have done to women within Pakistan. So she has to come to terms not only with understanding her heritage more, but she also has to understand what that means. What does it mean to be from that area? And especially in her case, to be a woman who is from that area, who is connected to that area. What do women have to go through in that area? What are people not talking about? And that was powerful to me. That was something that blew my mind throughout the whole film. It's a very simple sentiment, but it's a sentiment nonetheless that is pretty important, because look at your own surroundings, look at your own heritages. Where are you from? what background do you have? Do you have a connection from that? Are you, say, Irish American? Or are you Scandinavian living in the UK? Or are you from an area in South Africa? Are you Aboriginal? What is your background? And what does it mean politically to be a part of that? What connection should you have with your heritage as you come to connect with it? It's not enough just to connect with languages or clothing styles or spiritual practices. There are real, tangible people who have built these things. And people are people. People will do things to other people. So some of it's really beautiful and really good. Some of it's really dark and really bad. So in this case, they're showing it's great. She's understanding her heritage more. She's seeing the beautiful. They're showing you, somebody who is not aware of how Pakistani culture looks on the day-to-day. They're showing you how these things look, but then they're also bringing up an issue of, and this is also something you may not have been aware of, and especially people who are from that area, the more you dig, the more you're going to discover. And let's face it, we've all discovered things like this about our pasts, even from our own families. Just from the microcosm of the household, you've discovered things about your parents, about your brothers, your sisters, about yourself, that may not settle well with you. And what do? We just blind ourselves and we keep going. But it's really important to look and to see and to understand and to feel that pain. And so in this case, I think that Kay did a phenomenal job showing people what that would be like in this folkloric sense, you know? She's showing you the folk tale of the Churiel, and then she's showing that in the context of what it meant. Because it's quite an interesting situation to see that just around the time that people are letting go of these older folk tales and going, oh, you're so old-fashioned, that it just happens to be a folk tale that would highlight the fact that women are mistreated, and that the amount of women mistreated tends to go up, and people just mute it. They don't talk about it. They blind themselves. So by blinding ourselves to our heritage and our folk stories and about the parts of reality and conversation that we have that are deemed old-fashioned, a bit too hokey, if you will, these stories have a purpose. And I think this actually highlights the bigger picture for horror as well. Horror has a purpose. Horror is deeply political. I've mentioned it already. Horror films, films of all kind, are political by nature, but horror films especially are deeply political. This is what the Salem Horror Fest is all about. So I feel that this is a movie that was perfectly picked for them to showcase, and one that if you really want to get a vibe for what the Salem Horror Fest is all about, you should check out Black Lake, because you're going to get that political statement without it being about voting for anybody or anything like the nonsense we're seeing right now in the world. It's really about people to people. What do we do to each other? What is the truth behind this? And how have tales of terror been trying to warn us and show us how we should behave on a moral level? Lastly, I just wanted to say one quick thing about an interpretation I had of the film, because with this whole story of this artist taking on the physique and being of the Churiel, both in her dream, but then also in reality, I felt that there was something being said there beyond just saying, hey, look, you are aware of a situation and now you're a monster. Not that at all. I think that would be an incorrect reading of the film. For me, it felt as if Arya is an artist for a reason. Kay played Arya for a reason. The Pakistani heritage, all of it, links back to Kay. I'm going to take that aside just because I don't know Kay, so I'm just going to do the interpretation from the standpoint of Arya as a character, as an artist, on a very more or less objective level, as much as I can. But I will say, it felt to me as what was being said is that if you want to take the story of the Churiel, how can we look at it in the modern day? Who are the Churiels in our life? If they're not ghosts, if we don't believe in ghosts and goblins and witches and demons and possession, how are these things manifest today? What is their function today? And what should we learn from them today? And if the Churiel is to represent the pain and anguish of women who are abused, women who are murdered, women who are raped, women who are treated like utter dog shit, basically, by men, and it's just whispered away, then for this artist to take it on it's an interesting point that at the moment she starts to transform is the moment she gets her inspiration. She starts to paint just feverishly all over the place and just aggressively as well. She's bleeding from the hands, she's bleeding from her eyes and her teeth, and she's just painting with all kinds of dark colors and screaming at the end of the movie with blood coming from her teeth. The fact that she transforms twice, both in her dreams and reality, feels to me that the artists are the Turiel of our day to day. At least the artists that understand these situations, who have a voice for the people who have been affected by these situations, whether they've been affected themselves or not. Because in the case of Arya, she personally was not affected by this until she became possessed, and then she felt all the physical horror of the rape and murder of this child. So it was a really empowering moment. And this is me coming from you as a cis man. I found it deeply empowering to see this woman just take this rage and physically transform herself into becoming the entity that speaks for the voiceless, that speaks for the abused. And it said to me, this is what art can be used for, and often is made for. The artists are the Turiel. We are the ones who are going to keep the memories of the dead alive, and we will scream for them. I will scream for them, and a lot of my contemporaries will scream for them, and I feel that Kay definitely screamed for them. So I am humbled and proud to have been able to see this movie, and thankful that we had a voice like this. It's not an easy road to get to this interpretation. It's not an easy watch by any means, this film. But it's also not this extreme, dark, depressing film. It's by no means anything like Martyrs or any extreme French-style film, anything like that. There's gore in it, it's bloody, it has a very heavy topic at the core of it, but for me it felt more in the line of a movie like La Llorona that I've reviewed here on the channel. It has a more somber, but also kind of slow-paced tone to it, and it just kind of amps up as we go along. But still, that amping up, it's supposed to fill you up with a bit of rage and just what the fuck is going on in the world. And we have enough of that in the world right now, and yet these things still matter, and they still impact on a very emotional way. For that, I think the film is incredibly powerful. That's the best word I can give it, is powerful. So, despite any critique I may have had for the film, on these very small levels of maybe some of the acting or some of the confusion, the script writing here and there, they're very just minuscule compared to what this movie gets right and what it has to say and how much it made me feel while I was watching it. I was very tired and I was making my notes and I still managed to just feel all of this. So thank you very much, Kay, for making this movie, for putting your heart and your soul and putting just so much energy into it and a lot of work. It really paid off. So if you are checking out the Salem Horror Fest, please make sure you check out Black Lake by KXI, amongst all the other wonderful films. I do hope to be presenting some more reviews for you, not too sure. We get the screeners as they come in, but hey, I'm proud enough to have been able to be allowed to do this. So thank you so much for the Salem Horror Fest for allowing this channel to be represented and to represent the festival as well. I'm wishing you all a wonderful and safe time. I know that things are not the best and it's a bit tense right now, but keep each other safe, and please keep the thoughts and memories of those who have passed in your minds and in your hearts. So stay safe, everybody, and keep shocking.